Coming to you live from Big Springs, California, it's the Loaded Souls Podcast.
Welcome to the Loaded... We're not on the air. Are we on the air? Are we on the air? We're not on the air.
Hit the button.
What button?
That big red button. The big red one. Right there. Got it.
Okay. Welcome to the Loaded Souls Podcast. My name's Eric and I'm your host, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Wherever you're listening from or whatever time it is, I appreciate you coming by and listening to us and giving us a spin. So the topics basically, or the two threads of this podcast are the two main threads are trauma and music, and everything underneath, and where they meet and intertwine, and how they work together. And I've, for a while now, I've wanted to talk about trauma a bit and my own experience with trauma. I know it's a hot word and all that stuff, but just talking about the effects of trauma and how it's affected my life and my music and all that good stuff. I think it's important to be able to have some dialogue about it. I don't talk a lot about it, like openly with lots of different people. I have a few people that know know me pretty well in that deeper sense, and I have friends out there that know my history and stuff like that. So I think it's important to talk about it. I've been listening to some other podcasts about adoption, and just sometimes I try to get a little more insight into myself and stuff. And there's a lot of things that come up that are just mind blowing, that other people have in their lives that were also adopted kids. And, relatability is important, and being able to feel like, you're able to kind of have other people that you can relate to. Relatability, like I said. So, anyway, yeah, this is the very first episode of Loaded Souls Podcast, and episode 1 is entitled From the Beginning. So each episode, I'm going to see if I can pick a song title to kind of go with the theme of the episode. And since this is the very first one, I thought Emerson, Lake and Palmer, From the Beginning is a good title. So, and it's mainly going to be a introduction of, things that we can talk about. I'll introduce myself and let you know a little of my background and all that good stuff. And eventually I have ideas of having, people on the show and being able to interview other musicians that have had different traumas in their life, from different walks of life and different things. And in my case, it was being adopted, and being abandoned at birth. That's really the first trauma that I ever experienced. So, and just the effects of it, So, yeah. So I guess I'll just start out and just start there and just let you know. So yeah, I was abandoned or put up for adoption at birth by my mother, my birth mother, and at the time, obviously, I didn't know any details or anything like that. I didn't find anything out for quite a while, up into, I guess I was in my 20s when I actually did some looking and found her and stuff, and we met and all that. But at the time, I was put up for adoption, and it took about 8 months for my mom and dad to take me home. So I was 8 months. I was in a foster home or whatever, foster, like hospital, being taken care of and watched over and all that. And so I didn't find out I was adopted until a bit later in my life, and I didn't really, I felt awkward. I don't, like any other kid, I guess. I didn't know there was anything different or whatever. I didn't know my parents were not my parents and all that, and until a bit later. And I don't remember exactly when it happened, but so anyway, so I was, at birth I was I was given up for adoption. And, later on, obviously, we know more about stuff like that now and how that's really a pretty major trauma. There's been books written about it, the primal wound and all this stuff. So, and I remember, getting older in my life and seeing like animals pulled from their mothers and see how they freak out and all that. And it would just, something would ring true with me. Something would ring inside and go, whoa, that's just heavy. So, anyway, I kind of get back to a little bit later in my life, around 7 or 8, I believe it was, my parents separated, and my mom moved into an apartment in the same town that I grew up in Camarillo, California. And somewhere around then that time, I don't remember the exact, I just remember I think I was in fourth or fifth grade. My mom just passed away. She was going to work or coming home, I can't remember, and pulled over the side of the road, and her heart stopped, and boom, and that was it. And I just remember being at school and my teacher coming and telling me, my dad was there to talk to me, and going out to the car, and he had told me what happened, and just, it was huge, just, besides them splitting up and all that, but, that's a lot for a small child to, grasp. I remember just being like, what the hell, and then around that time, I don't remember if it was a little before or after or whatever, but that's when I found out I was adopted. So that kind of raised up all kinds of other stuff, like, what does that mean? Who's my real mother? Once I found out what that meant. And so it was a challenging first, 10 years of my life. And it feels like that at that point, that definitely kind of set the tone of who, or of how I was going to interact with life, put it that way. Very cautiously, not very trusting, and always feeling like someone, that it was just really unpredictable. There wasn't a lot of stability with those two major things happening. So, and those are heavy things for a kid, but you get older and you start moving on, and life went on, and definitely things would come up, and I got into drugs and this and that, and I'll get a little bit more into that here in a few minutes. But so that's, a heavy start. And thankfully, my dad was very loving. He was very understanding. He, from an early age, he used to tell me if I ever wanted to look for my real mother or father, that I was welcome to, and he knew that it would be something that would probably help, and blah, 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 and he took care of me, especially after my mom died. I really clinged, I was young, and it's like one of my parents have already died, and I gotta hold on, and hope that nothing's gonna happen to my dad, and, up to a certain age, and then, of course, I pushed him away, and did all the stuff that we'd normally do as teenagers, and even probably a little bit more extreme. But my dad and I, even to this day, are still, I just, he was, in some ways my savior. He kind of, I could have been adopted by, who knows, but he just a very loving father, so I'm very fortunate in that way. At that, it, with all that being said, that doesn't really matter to the actual wound, That's what I know now. All that stuff, like growing up, and, people say things to people that are adopted, like, well, you're lucky that your parents are who they are, or that, that fortunate that they picked you, and, all these things that people are trying to kind of make you feel better don't necessarily make you feel better, because it's just, there's always this questioning of why would she do this, and why was I abandoned and adopted, and most of the people that I've talked to that are adoptees, just for some reason take on, I think as a child we just take on this thing as how to have been something that we did, or that something's wrong or with us, and I don't know why that happens, but that seems to be the case, So, and that was always in the back of my mind, like, what did I do or whatever. So, that's a lot, for a child, and especially, eventually I got into some therapies and this and that, and I went to a lot of different therapists, throughout my life, but without people really getting what that core wounding is, back then, I mean, they didn't really have a lot of insight onto it, I mean, a lot of people figured that since if you're adopted at birth, a baby doesn't have any kind of cognitive brain skills, so it doesn't affect the child, and but now they know that that's different, because the body remembers the trauma, which is even harder because the mind has no way to get to it. The mind isn't even developed at that point, but the body reacts. The body has a memory of its own, and so those things happen at a young age. And I've dealt with anxiety and depression and all that all my life. Even to this day, just not as intense, but I've definitely experienced some really intense depression and anxiety and different and everything that falls under that. So, but on the flip side of that coin, there's times where I went through my life where that's any kind of trauma or any kind of stuff like that didn't affect me. I wasn't rubbing up against it in any other way in a relationship or things like that, and then as you get older and I started dating and this and that, and in relationships, it would always come up, and even in friendships too, to a certain extent. So, but then I remember around maybe 8 or 9 is when music started really coming into my life more. Like I had one of those little turntables that I think it was a Mickey Mouse one where it was like a suitcase and you open it up and it's got the turntable in there, and I had like children's albums and stuff, and maybe, I don't know, Winnie the Pooh or Peter Pan from Walt Disney. And then I remember like right around in 6th grade, one of my friends, Richie Rodriguez, I believe his name was, I went over to his house and he had all these posters on his walls and stuff. It was like overnight, like it seemed like 5th grade, he was just a normal kind of goofy kid, just like me. And then all of a sudden, 6th grade, he had this cool kind of swagger or whatever. And he was listening to music that like Elton John and things like that. His older brother had turned him on to. And that's when I really started digging into like, okay, hold on a second. And I went in my my dad had the cool home stereo system from the 70s, and looked through his albums, and there was like John Denver. I remember listening to John Denver music, and that always brought up emotions about my mom for some reason. I don't know why, it just did. But and then he had Melanie, who I really just totally just went for, and just loved her voice and the emotion in her voice. And that was another, at that point, it seemed music being more of a medium to be able to allow myself to emote, and without really knowing why. It was something that just touched me, and I was able to cry and be able to let things out, and then I remember being young, and we would go to this place called Salzer's, which was in Ventura County, and it was this cool kind of hippie record store. And you'd walk in and you'd smell incense, and they'd have posters, and it was like 2 stories. It was all made out of, it was like this open air market kind of indoors with all this wood and wood stairs and just albums everywhere and music blaring and all that good stuff, and just really being intrigued and being like, wow, and looking at all the album covers. And I remember my dad buying the Who by Numbers, because he loved that song Squeezebox, and he wasn't really big into buying singles and stuff. He did have 45s, but not, he would buy the album because he wanted to listen to the other stuff. And he didn't really take to the Who that much except for that one song. And I remember listening to the whole album and just being like, wow, like Slip Kid and of course Squeezebox and all that. So it was just a whole new experience and wanting to like dive into that. And the next, and then I think the first album I bought with my own money was Elton John Caribou. It had the Bitches Back on it, and You're So Static, and it was just, my friend Richie turned me on to Elton John. I was like, wow, this guy's cool with the glasses and all the cool garb and all that stuff. So, yeah, and then from there, just starting to discover music. I think the first band that I really got turned on to that I just fell for, and most people, most probably, boys my age back then did, was Kiss. And a friend of mine down the street brought a concert poster and also the Kiss Alive album. She just went seen him, and she wanted, she's like, you got to listen to these guys. So I listened to them, and I was just like, wow. And I was hooked. I mean, and looking at all the pictures and reading their little letters that they write on the back and all that, and just the theatrics of it. And it was just about, in some ways, music was kind of an escapism at that point. I could kind of put the headphones on and listen to an album and just kind of get lost in the music, lost in being maybe in the audience, or just lost in the music. And so yeah, from then on I was like a Kiss head for sure. I mean, I dressed up, at least 2 or 3 times in a row for Halloween and all that stuff. And then just, starting to really get into lyrics and understanding melodies, and, with Led Zeppelin and Aerosmith. And I remember one of the first songs I heard that that I kind of got a lyric out of was, it's called Write Me by Aerosmith on their first album. And he said something about, it's been this way forever, suicide crossing my mind, but I never, 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 never get so far behind. And I remember listening to that, just going, wow, like understanding that these people are emoting, and some of these guys are telling us, things about themselves and experiences of life and how it would affect me, and allow me to be able to kind of work through some of these things, as I was growing up. So, but yeah, so that's how music just started out with me, and just as a big, and it's always been huge in my life. All my friends, everybody I know, that I'm pretty close with, are definitely big music heads, and music's been a big factor. So, and those bands back then, some of them were, just larger than life. Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith, all these bands just seemed to be, just way larger than life. And but just really loving to get into the lyrics and how it just takes you away, and that experience of putting your headphones on and you have your little stereo, whatever it was. I remember the first one was like had the AM, FM, probably an 8-track, and then turntable all built into one, and then you had the little speakers, and then my first set of headphones, and I would just get lost in the headphones, listening to the radio, listening to albums. I remember listening to Dr. Demento as a kid, just being totally into that, and but just a way to escape, of having some relief, from some of the traumatic things in life. And I mean, at that point, I would definitely have trouble sometimes going to school and just showing up, everything was just, I don't know, I felt like I was always on high alert, and it was very anxiety ridden to do anything new. And my dad told me when I was a kid that he took me to this pool. It was it was a town close to where we lived, and it was like an indoor pool. And he'd teach you how to swim and this and that. And I just would not put my face in the water. I was just freaked out about it. And I held onto the side and kicked and just, wouldn't put my face in the water. And once I got out of the pool, the lady threw me in the deep end. And that's how I learned how to swim and put my face in the water. But everything, I just remember things being very delicate, and I just wasn't real, But then I got a little older, and I started playing baseball, and getting a little bit more into athletics and stuff. And I loved playing baseball. That helped a lot. And then, I don't know what it was. I think it was in between sixth and seventh grade, right around there is when I kind of started getting into cigarettes and meeting people that were smoking pot. And mostly were, a lot of my friends' older brothers were the ones that were hanging out and getting loaded and doing other things and stuff. And it just, I don't know, I just was attracted to it. That seemed like a whole nother way to escape, and definitely once I tried it, alcohol was probably the first thing I ever did, just sneaking it from my parents and this and that. And that was like, one thing. But I remember the first time smoking pot, just feeling like, yeah, okay, And, from there, everything else kind of branched off. But so that's kind of, I think I might just taper off here and maybe end it at about right around there, which is around 13, 12, 13, somewhere around in that age, just kind of getting into the, escaping through, better living through chemistry, put it that way. So, but yeah, I mean, and I'm really, yeah, I don't know, I'm grateful for this podcast. I'm really going to give this a shot, and I hope people can get something out of it, and it can be very, it's very cathartic for me. Like I said, I mean, I still have habits from when I was a kid, habits of avoidance and having a hard time being open, and trusting. I mean, these things are still with me, although they're a lot better than they were. I mean, I meditate every day. I do a lot to bring more awareness to myself, but the topic of trauma and like getting into that place is not something that I volunteer to do all the time. I know that that's where the wound is where the gem is, that's where the new can come from, so I know I have to be open to getting into that, and it gets heavy. So I've had times where I've had some really deep therapies and just abandoned myself into it, and really got a lot out of it. There's times where things come up for me, and I'm just like, well, I don't know if I'm willing to, stick with this right now. So I still have distractions, of other things that I do, and funny enough, is music is really not a distraction anymore. It's definitely more therapeutic, and gives me a little bit more courage to kind of dive into these things if I need to, Because I mean, what I've kind of learned is that trauma never really, the scar, the wound never goes away necessarily. It's just one of those things that's there. And it's all, it's just more about exposing it to the light, and allowing it to come up. And for a lot of years, I was oblivious to it. I mean, the first thing you have to do is kind of wake up to the fact that you may have this, that there may be something inside you that is still festering, from lack of attention and love. And like I said, these things are, I don't know, maybe in the last 10 or so, maybe more than that, years, have been really a lot more enlightenment on this topic for me. And I'm looking forward to getting a little bit more into the adoption part of it for anybody out there that, I mean, it was always really good for me to hear people talk about their adoption experiences, because it's, that's really what I can relate to. But on the deeper level, it's mostly just really comes down to the abandonment, not how it happened, but the abandonment itself, and everything that stems from that. And, and I know there's always light at the end of a tunnel, and there's always, there's always more tunnel. So when, you start to be able to navigate through that and do what you can to make the tunnel less ominous, And part of that for me is music, is creating music. And so, and during this podcast in the beginning, I'll probably play a little excerpts from music that I've written or have been writing, and I may play songs from bands that I've been in, and I'll definitely ask for their permission. But or just parts of songs that mean something to me. As far as it has to be stuff that I've done. I can't really play other people's music, I don't think, on a podcast, but maybe, I don't know. I'll find out more. But like I said, well, and this is just the first episode, so, and I made it through pretty unscathed, and hopefully, hopefully you did too. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and definitely wanted to get into different topics, and mainly understanding that most of my life, any therapies or any kind of stuff that I was doing to better myself was kind of treating the anxiety, trying to treat the anxiety, treat the depression, and all the things that stem from the actual core wound of the trauma. And only until I really dove into that did something really start to change for me. And a lot of it was, just it was time. I mean, I just found a book on adoption, started reading it. It just kind of came to me, and it brought up all these other kind of deep wound things and really understanding more. So, just being willing to dive into that, because that's really where everything comes from. We can treat the symptoms and the depression with medications and blah, 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 all these things that we try to do. But the real bottom line is to get to the core of it, so it can get some air and get some attention, and so we can, feel, so I can feel better about myself. That's, I don't, about everybody else, but, so we can feel better about ourselves. And, you look around, and I look around at the world, and it's kind of obvious to me that we have a lot of pain and suffering out there of people, and people are not loving themselves much, or they wouldn't do the things to others that they do. And we wouldn't treat other people like we do, if we actually truly loved each other, and loved ourselves, and really, got to the core of why we don't, if we don't, and why we don't. So hopefully that's what I would like to bring, a little enlightenment on the subject of trauma, and possibly music as well, sharing stories about music, and the songs that I've been writing within the past, I don't know, well, actually, probably started in about 2007. There were some songs that came out that were just otherworldly, from somewhere else. I played in bands and stuff, and when I was younger in the '90s, and played bass, and did a little bit of harmonizing and this and that, but not a lot of lyric writing and melodies and stuff like that. And then once I started doing that, man, things just started coming up. And I really believed that it was just time. It was like something within me was like, all right, it's time for you to know these things, and you've been asking, so here we go. And it's been this journey, since then, of songwriting, and off and on, and all the self-doubt that comes up. And when I get into songwriting, is it's not good, or it's not this, or it's not that, or whatever. Just lots of self-doubt, which has been there for a long time as well, and that's just something I always have to look at when it comes up, and realize where it's coming from, and hopefully just allow it to, pass through me. But yeah, songwriting is important. Right now, it's just, it's very therapeutic. Whether it's just the groove of it, or the lyrical content and the melody, a lot of times is that, one of those melodies. Sometimes I'll sing a melody, and it'll be one of those that just touches something, deep, like a lyric or a melody that I've heard from the past, in a different band or something, or whatever. Just one of those that just touches you. It's, you don't even know necessarily what, it just does. It just hits some kind of emotional nerve. So I kind of work with that. I like to work with that. But anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for tuning in to the very first episode of Loaded Souls podcast. And it's a beautiful day here. We're here at Mercy Me Studios in Big Springs, California, just north of Mount Shasta. Being able to see the mountain, it's beautiful. And I'm looking out right now out at Owl's Peak, another just really cool rock formation just to the north of us. So it's beautiful here, and I hope to hear from people. If there's a way to comment on these podcasts, I'm not sure yet. So if there's a way to comment, leave a like, whatever. Let me know that you listened and that you'd like to hear more. So I'm definitely into giving some more, and I have episode 2 already in mind, and I'm just kind of winging it. I'm not writing too much down. I just want to kind of give it a free for all. I don't like to. I don't know. I just want to let it go and just talk. So I don't talk a lot about stuff like that. So this is a new experience for me. So we'll give it a shot, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we will hear you soon. All right. Bye.
You've been listening to the Loaded Souls podcast, live from Big Springs, California. Eric, high five, man. High five. Come on, you did good, man. High five. Whatever.